with a desperate search. A night shattered by the sudden disappearance of a young woman. Detectives arrive to find evidence of violence, hinting at a difficult and harrowing case. The crime scene is eerie, walls smeared with blood and signs of a brutal struggle. The criminal taunts the authorities, torments families, and revels in the chaos he creates. As the case unfolds, investigators face chilling murders unlike anything they have encountered before. This is not just a story of murder, but one of horror, deception, and merciless evil. A vibrant American high school senior, she embarked on a celebratory journey with her classmates, destined to create cherished memories of sunsets, laughter, and the rhythm of island life. Instead, her disappearance became one of the most haunting cases of our time, turning her into a symbol of unanswered questions and grief. As the warm Aruban nights blanketed the island, a sinister undercurrent seemed to weave through its picturesque beauty. Among the festive tourists, one figure stood out, not for his fame, but for his charm and an enigmatic aura. Natalie Holloway was born on October 24, 1986 in Clinton, Mississippi. She was the eldest child in her family, a bright and ambitious young woman who stood out in academics and extracurricular activities. Her parents divorced when she was 7, but they maintained a close-knit family dynamic, with Natalie and her younger brother primarily living with their mother. When Natalie was 14, her mother remarried a wealthy businessman, and the family moved to Mountain Brook, Alabama, where Natalie thrived in her new environment. Excelling in school, she became a cheerleader and dancer, earning a full scholarship to the University of Alabama. Her future seemed boundless, full of promise and potential. In May 2005, Natalie joined 124 fellow high school students and 11 chaperones on a celebratory trip to Aruba, marking their graduation. Aruba, a picturesque island in the Dutch Caribbean, was renowned for its safety and low crime rate, making it an ideal destination. The group stayed at an all-inclusive Holiday Inn, where they enjoyed days of sun-soaked beaches, crystal-clear waters, and carefree relaxation. Nights were spent dining, socializing, and exploring the local nightlife, including casinos and bars. For Natalie and her friends, the trip felt like a dream come true, a perfect send-off before beginning their next chapter in life. On May 29th, the final day of their trip, students began packing their belongings for the flight home. Natalie, like her peers, placed her passport beside her suitcase, preparing for an early departure the next morning. After dinner, some students opted to spend their last night unwinding, while others ventured out to soak up the vibrant Aruban nightlife one final time. Natalie chose the latter, heading out with friends to enjoy the festive atmosphere. It was the last time anyone from her group would see her. The next morning, teachers and students gathered in the hotel lobby for checkout. However, during roll call, they discovered that Natalie was missing. Assuming she had overslept, chaperones called her room, but there was no answer. Concerned, they enlisted hotel staff to unlock her door, only to find an untouched suitcase with her passport inside. Clear signs she had not returned the previous night. Panic set in as staff, teachers, and students scoured the hotel grounds, but Natalie was nowhere to be found. By 11 a.m., a chaperone contacted Natalie's mother, Beth Holloway, informing her of the situation. Beth, devastated by the news, insisted that Natalie would never leave on her own and expressed her immediate fear that her daughter had been abducted. Her maternal instinct was spot on. Something was terribly wrong. Beth called Natalie's biological father, Dave Holloway, and together, they vowed to do everything possible to find their daughter. Meanwhile, the chaperones reported Natalie's disappearance to local police, initiating a search. With heavy hearts, most of the students and teachers returned home, leaving behind a smaller group of volunteers to aid the investigation. Aruban authorities quickly launched an official inquiry, focusing on retracing Natalie's steps on the night she vanished. Witness accounts pointed to Joran van der Sloot, then an 18-year-old Dutch student, as the last person seen with her. Joran, who had been living in Aruba and frequenting the same bars as the students, reportedly left with Natalie and 2 friends in a car. Initially, Joran and his associates claimed they had dropped Natalie off at her hotel after a night of drinking, but their stories soon unraveled under scrutiny. The Holloway family flew to Aruba to assist in the search, sparing no expense in hiring private investigators and coordinating with the police. Beth Holloway's presence on the island became a symbol of unwavering determination as she tirelessly pursued leads, distributed flyers, and rallied media attention. Despite these efforts, physical evidence was scarce, and the investigation faced numerous setbacks, including inconsistent testimonies, delays, and allegations of corruption within the Aruban justice system. The mystery of Natalie's disappearance grew darker with each passing day. Joran's behavior raised further suspicion. He gave multiple contradictory accounts of the events, sometimes claiming innocence and at other times implicating himself in bizarre ways. In one recorded conversation, he admitted to being involved in Natalie's death, only to later retract his statement, calling it a fabrication. These false confessions only deepened the Holloway family's anguish and fueled public outrage. Aruba faced mounting pressure from the United States, as the disappearance of an American teenager on its shores threatened to damage its tourism-driven economy. Yet despite exhaustive searches, including dives to explore underwater caves and shipwrecks, Natalie's body was never found, and no definitive evidence linked Joran to her presumed death. With every revelation, the case grew darker. Allegations of false confessions, tampered evidence, and judicial missteps left the Holloway family in agony, grasping at hope in a sea of despair. Joran's actions, marked by evasions and shocking admissions, only deepened the suspicions. The intense media scrutiny surrounding Natalie's disappearance highlighted a disturbing underbelly of tourism-dependent Aruba, where local authorities were pressured to maintain an image of safety for their American visitors. This pressure became palpable as Natalie's parents, Beth and Dave Holloway, relentlessly sought answers. Joran, never shy of the limelight, added fuel to the fire. He appeared in interviews with a brazen demeanor, recounting his version of the events leading up to Natalie's disappearance. Claiming innocence, he painted himself as a victim of public hysteria while shamelessly capitalizing on the publicity to profit from books and interviews. Despite their efforts, Aruba and police struggled to gather concrete evidence against Duran. Searches of his home yielded no definitive clues, further frustrating the Holloway family and their supporters. Duran's polarizing persona captivated audiences across the globe. Some saw him as a pathological liar whose behavior betrayed his guilt, while others believed his protestations of innocence. The tragedy took an even more chilling turn years later when Duran, already under suspicion for Natalie's case, became involved in the brutal murder of Stephanie Flores in Peru. Once again, the world was confronted with questions about his psyche and the motivations behind such acts of cruelty. Was he a remorseless predator, or was there a more complex story buried beneath his contradictions? To truly understand this case, it's crucial to examine the parallel tragedy of Stephanie Flores. A bright, ambitious young woman from a prominent Peruvian family, Stephanie was adored by her parents and 4 older brothers. Her father, Ricardo Flores, was a respected businessman and former presidential candidate. Stephanie's love for gambling brought her into fateful contact with Duran in 2010. On May 30, 2010, 21-year-old Stephanie Flores went to a poker tournament at the Atlantic City Casino in Lima, Peru. Stephanie was an avid poker player, well known for her skills at the table, and just days before, she had won $10,000, a testament to her strategic mind and confidence in her abilities. As she prepared for the event, she assured her father, Ricardo Flores, that she would only be away for a short time. Her family had no reason to worry. Stephanie was a responsible young woman who maintained close communication with her loved ones. However, after the tournament, she never returned home. Ricardo Flores became increasingly concerned when he could not reach his daughter. Stephanie had never disappeared before, and her sudden silence was completely out of character. He called her brothers for help, and together, they reached out to Stephanie's friends and acquaintances, but no one had seen or heard from her. Desperation set in as they scoured the neighborhood and frequented her usual haunts, but their efforts yielded nothing. Finally, with a heavy heart, Ricardo contacted the police to report her disappearance. The investigation began at the Atlantic City Casino, where the poker tournament had taken place. Police spoke to staff members, but no one had any information about Stephanie's whereabouts. Detectives obtained surveillance footage from the hotel, hoping the cameras could provide clues. Upon reviewing the recordings, they found footage of Stephanie entering the tournament area around 3 a.m. She sat beside a man dressed in light-colored clothing who was already at the table. The two appeared to strike up a friendly conversation, sharing smiles and chatting throughout the event. Around 5 a.m., they left together. Hotel employees remembered the man, describing him as polite and charming, with one staff member even likening his looks to actor Brad Pitt. However, charm was not enough to dispel the growing suspicion surrounding the mystery man. Where had the pair gone after leaving the casino floor? Further surveillance footage provided the answer. At 5:16 a.m., the two entered room 309, a room registered in the man's name. Shortly after, he was seen leaving the room and returning with coffee and pastries. 3 hours and 20 minutes later, he exited again, this time carrying a backpack, and never returned. Before leaving the hotel, the man informed the staff not to disturb the occupant of room 309, claiming she was resting. Respecting his request, no one entered the room until the police arrived to investigate. When detectives opened the door, they were met with a horrifying sight. Stephanie Flores lay dead, covered in blood, and the room was in disarray. The brutality of the crime shocked even the seasoned investigators. Stephanie's body showed signs of a violent struggle. Her neck was broken, and there was evidence of blunt force trauma to her head and neck. Blood stained the floor and walls, and the medical examiner later confirmed that she had died from a cerebral hemorrhage caused by the blunt trauma. Despite the violence of the scene, there was no evidence of sexual assault, leading investigators to rule out that motive. However, the motive of robbery quickly emerged. Stephanie's money, credit cards, and jewelry were missing. She had been carrying around $155,000, including $10,000 only in poker winnings, and $5,000 from her father for a new laptop. The suspect had not only taken her life, but also her possessions, fleeing the scene in cold calculation. The man identified by the surveillance footage and the room's registration was 22-year-old Joran van der Sloot, a Dutch national. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered startling information about him. He was already on an international wanted list. Joran's name had been infamously linked to the disappearance of another young woman, Natalie Holloway, which we talked about earlier. The parallels between the two cases were chilling. In both instances, Joran had been the last person seen with the victims. Both young women had promising futures, and their lives were cut tragically short. The connection between Natalie and Stephanie's cases reignited global scrutiny of Joran van der Sloot, exposing him as a manipulative figure who used charm to gain trust before unleashing violence. Joran's actions revealed a dangerous pattern, prompting questions about how he had evaded justice for so long. In the aftermath of Stephanie's murder, international outrage mounted. Her family, much like Natalie Holloway's, embarked on a painful journey for justice, facing not only their personal grief, but also the systemic failures that allowed Joran to remain free for years. As authorities pursued him, the Flores family stood resolute, determined to honor Stephanie's memory by ensuring her killer was held accountable. Their fight for justice became emblematic of the broader struggle to protect vulnerable individuals and hold perpetrators of violence to account. The investigation into Stephanie's murder exposed Joran's true nature, a man capable of calculating brutality, deceit, and exploitation. His crime served as a grim reminder of the dangers that can lurk beneath a polished exterior. This information was deeply troubling. It suggested that the suspect, Joran van der Sloot, might be linked to multiple crimes. For the authorities, apprehending this dangerous individual became a top priority. The manhunt was relentless, but Joran's exact whereabouts were unknown, leaving the police with limited leads. As they scoured for clues, investigators revisited the details of Natalie Holloway's disappearance, a case that had already gripped the world and shed light on Joran's dark potential. Understanding the circumstances surrounding Natalie's fate was essential to piecing together the broader pattern of Joran's behavior. Let's return to the story of Natalie Holloway, The parallels between the two cases painted a harrowing picture of a predator who exploited trust, charm, and opportunity to commit unimaginable crimes. For both families, the quest for justice became an enduring struggle. A painful reminder that even in paradise, darkness can strike without warning. Together, Natalie Holloway's parents, Beth and Dave, took the first available flight from a nearby city to Aruba, determined to find their daughter. Before boarding, Beth made frantic calls to emergency services and the FBI, pleading for their assistance in locating Natalie. Upon arrival on the island, they wasted no time launching their own search efforts. With photos of their missing daughter in hand, they questioned hotel staff, guests, and locals, refusing to leave any stone unturned. Their desperation was palpable, but their resolve was even stronger. Natalie had not returned to her hotel room on the final night of her trip. Friends reported seeing her talking to a tall, European-looking young man at the casino adjacent to their hotel. Security footage confirmed these accounts, showing Natalie interacting with a man, later identified as Joran van der Sloot. Around 1 a.m., Natalie was seen leaving the casino and getting into a gray Honda with Joran and two other young men, brothers Deepak and Satish Kalpo. All three were familiar faces at the hotel, known for frequenting the casino and preying on young, affluent tourists. But of the three suspects, only one stood out. Joran van der Sloot, at just 18, already had a reputation that belied his privileged upbringing. Born to a respected family, his father a lawyer aspiring to become a judge, Joran had been a promising student and athlete. However, his teenage years marked a descent into troubling behavior. He became a regular at local casinos and bars, developed a gambling problem, and was known for drinking excessively. Despite his polished exterior, those who knew him recognized his darker tendencies. When confronted by the Holloways and police, Joran's family initially deflected suspicion. The gray Honda linked to Natalie's disappearance was parked outside their home, yet Joran's father claimed his son was at another hotel casino. By the time authorities arrived there, Joran had left. It wasn't until later that Joran returned home, prompting his father to contact the police. Separated from his friends Deepak and Satish during questioning, Joran's account of the night immediately raised red flags. Initially, he claimed to have no connection to Natalie, but after being shown CCTV footage, his story shifted dramatically. Joran now admitted he had spent time with Natalie that night. He claimed she wanted to visit a nightclub, and he obliged, bringing along Deepak and Satish for the ride. The group partied, danced, and drank before heading to the lighthouse for a scenic view and then to Arashi Beach. Joran alleged that his friends left him and Natalie at the beach, where she, heavily intoxicated, began falling over and blacking out. Joran claimed he eventually left her there, explaining that he needed to wake up early for business the next morning. According to him, Natalie insisted she wanted to stay on the beach, making it clear she wouldn't be leaving with him. Joran's shifting narrative sowed confusion and frustration among investigators. At one point, he insinuated that a hotel security guard had approached Natalie after he left, but surveillance footage contradicted this claim, proving Natalie never returned to the hotel. As the story unraveled, Deepak and Satish also changed their accounts, now asserting that Joran had been more involved with Natalie than he admitted. They alleged he had left her on the beach alone after spending significant time with her. Despite repeated interrogations, arrests, and mounting inconsistencies in their statements, the trio evaded formal charges. Aruban authorities cited insufficient evidence, as no physical proof connected them to Natalie's disappearance. The Holloway family was devastated by the lack of progress, but they refused to give up. Beth became a relentless advocate for her daughter, keeping media attention on the case and pressuring officials to hold Joran and his accomplices accountable. In a cruel twist of fate, Joran's connection to Natalie's disappearance resurfaced years later in another horrific crime. On May 30, 2010, exactly 5 years after Natalie vanished, Joran murdered Stephanie Flores in a hotel room in Lima, Peru. What we talked about earlier in this video. This shocking act underscored his dangerous nature and further cemented the belief that he had been involved in Natalie's presumed death. In 2017, Joran confessed to Natalie's death during an extortion attempt against Beth Holloway, claiming he could lead investigators to her remains. However, this was later revealed as another cruel lie. The difficult case did not give the officers any peace. After some time, the police combed the beach again thoroughly, but their search yielded no significant clues that could lead to finding Natalie Holloway. Investigators grew increasingly frustrated as time passed without progress. However, a potential breakthrough came when a gardener at a nearby hotel claimed to have seen 3 young men, Joran van der Sloot, Deepak, and Satish Kalpo, digging a hole in a vacant lot near a pond on the night of Natalie's disappearance. Acting on this lead, the police arrived at the location, drained the pond, and excavated the area, but found nothing. The tip, like so many others, led nowhere, leaving the case shrouded in mystery. Natalie's family grew increasingly exasperated with the investigation. They publicly accused the police of incompetence, expressing their belief that Joran van der Sloot was deeply involved in their daughter's disappearance and should be coerced into confessing. However, Aruban authorities refrained from taking aggressive measures without conclusive evidence. Tensions between the family and the local police mounted, further complicating the investigation. Desperate to find their daughter, the Holloways announced a substantial reward: $100,000 for information about Natalie's whereabouts and $1 million for her safe return. While the reward garnered significant attention, it also introduced chaos. The police argued that the reward created distractions, as locals bombarded them with baseless tips, conspiracy theories, and false leads, ultimately hindering their efforts. Despite the mounting tensions, the Holloways refused to give up. They distributed flyers, put up posters, and canvassed the island, leaving no avenue unexplored. Meanwhile, local sentiment began to shift, with some residents accusing the Holloway family of applying undue pressure on the authorities. This friction further strained the already tumultuous relationship between Natalie's family and Aruban officials. After intense scrutiny, Joran van der Sloot, along with the Kalpo brothers, was taken into custody. For weeks, the suspects faced interrogations, but the evidence remained circumstantial at best. After 3 weeks, Deepak and Satish Kalpo were released, leaving Joran in custody for 2 more months. At one point, the Kalpo brothers claimed that Joran's father had helped him dispose of Natalie's body. This accusation led to Paulus van der Sloot's arrest, but authorities could not substantiate the claim, and he was released 3 days later. Paulus sued the Aruban police for wrongful detention and won $40,000 in damages. 3 years after Natalie's disappearance, new testimonies brought renewed attention to the case. A witness claimed to have seen Joran and his father near the pond at 4 a.m. on the night Natalie vanished. According to this account, Joran ran from the pond to a fast food restaurant, and shortly afterward, the pair drove off in a red Jeep. Another lead emerged from Joran's ex-girlfriend who recounted an unsettling comment he had made. "Who knows? You might be on the beach with someone capable of disposing of a corpse." She reported feeling deeply unnerved by the remark, which only heightened suspicions about his involvement. Despite these new leads and the ever-changing accounts provided by Joran and his associates, the authorities determined there was still insufficient evidence to press charges. The case against Joran, Deepak, and Satish was officially closed, with investigators asserting it would only be reopened if substantial new evidence emerged. Joran van der Sloot's behavior in the aftermath of Natalie's disappearance was as shocking as it was chilling. Rather than maintaining a low profile, he appeared to revel in the attention, granting interviews and making brazen statements. In 2008, a Dutch journalist released hidden camera footage in which Joran described Natalie's final moments. According to the recording, Joran claimed they had been on the beach together and engaged in sexual activity before Natalie suddenly began convulsing and lost consciousness. In a matter-of-fact tone, he detailed how he called a friend with a boat to dispose of her body at sea. While the tape initially appeared damning, Aruban authorities dismissed it as insufficient evidence. They argued that Joran's statements were unreliable, speculating that he was seeking fame and financial gain by sensationalizing his involvement. Forensic experts pointed out that without a body or corroborating evidence, the claims in the tape were legally inconclusive. They seemed to mock the situation, expressing relief that Natalie's body hadn't been found, as it would have incriminated him. Joran's erratic behavior continued to escalate. He voluntarily checked himself into a psychiatric clinic, further complicating public perception of his mental state and motives. Critics speculated that he was attempting to manipulate public opinion or build a defense strategy based on mental health issues. Throughout these developments, the Holloway family never wavered in their determination to find answers. Beth Holloway became a tireless advocate for missing persons, using Natalie's case as a platform to raise awareness about the challenges families face when a loved one vanishes. Her persistence kept the case in the public eye, ensuring that the world would not forget Natalie's story. Meanwhile, the lack of closure continued to haunt the Holloways. The strain took an emotional and financial toll on the family, but they refused to let the passage of time erode their hope. Beth Holloway frequently returned to Aruba, revisiting potential leads and working with private investigators in a relentless quest for justice. While Joran van der Sloot's actions have been widely condemned, the failure to secure justice for Natalie underscores broader systemic challenges in international investigations. After leaving Aruba, Joran van der Sloot moved to Bangkok, Thailand, where he used money earned from media interviews and the sale of books to open a restaurant. For a time, he seemed to settle into his new life, but trouble quickly followed him. In the same year, a journalist interviewed him in Thailand, and during the conversation, Joran claimed he had sold Natalie Holloway into sexual slavery for money. He alleged that he had split the profits with the Kalpo brothers, who had helped him. Shockingly, he also bragged about trafficking Thai women to the Netherlands, reportedly earning $30,000 for each woman. However, after the interview, he called the journalist back and claimed it was all a joke. Joran's erratic behavior raised alarms, and local authorities launched an investigation into his statements about trafficking Thai women. Although no conclusive evidence was found, the scrutiny forced Joran to flee Thailand, abandoning his business and savings. Later, he managed to sell the restaurant remotely, cutting his ties to the country. Not long after these events, Joran faced a personal tragedy when his father, Paulus van der Sloot, died of a heart attack. Joran reportedly blamed himself for his father's death, believing the stress from the accusations and legal battles contributed to it. Overwhelmed with guilt, he suffered a nervous breakdown and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. However, his time there did little to change his behavior or character. Upon his release, Joran found himself in dire financial straits and devised another scheme to make money. In 2019, Natalie Holloway's family lawyer revealed that Joran had contacted him anonymously, offering to sell information about the location of Natalie's remains. He demanded $250,000 for the information, with an upfront payment of $25,000. Despite his anonymity, investigators traced the communications back to Joran. Desperate for answers, Natalie's father agreed to meet Joran on the island of Aruba and paid him an advance of $25,000. During the meeting, Joran spun a new tale about Natalie's fate. He claimed that after picking her up, she wanted to be let go. According to him, during a heated argument, he pushed her, causing her to fall and hit her head on a rock, resulting in her instant death. Panicked, he said he sought his father's help, and together, they buried her body in the foundation of a house under construction. However, when police investigated the location Joran indicated, they discovered his story was another fabrication. The house had already been completed before Natalie's disappearance. Afterward, Joran emailed Natalie's father, admitting he had lied and fabricated the story. The Holloways, working with the FBI, used this fraudulent scheme to build a case against him. Joran was eventually charged with extortion, but before he could be apprehended, he fled Aruba. He traveled to Chile in 2 separate taxis, hoping to evade capture and board a flight out of the region. However, his escape was short-lived. On June 3, 2010, Joran's ex-girlfriend contacted the police, providing a tip about his whereabouts after he had called her to ask for money to fund his escape. Acting on her information, Chilean police apprehended Joran as he attempted to buy a plane ticket. In Chile, he was charged with the murder of Stephanie, which he committed in Peru. During his initial interrogation, Duran denied responsibility for Stephanie's death. He concocted a story about armed robbers breaking into the hotel room, stealing valuables, and killing Stephanie in the process. According to him, he had managed to escape during the chaos, and the blood on his clothes was from Stephanie's injuries. However, the evidence quickly dismantled his lies. Hotel CCTV footage showed no robbers entering the room, no gunshots were heard, and, most damningly, Stephanie had not been shot but beaten to death. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, Duran confessed 4 days after his arrest. He admitted that he and Stephanie had been talking and along when she accessed his laptop. There, she found information about his alleged involvement in Natalie Holloway's disappearance. He claimed it was a misunderstanding, insisting he had no involvement in the case. But Stephanie, terrified and distrustful, attempted to escape the room. In her panic, she punched Duran in the face, which enraged him. His reaction was violent and brutal. He elbowed her in the nose, leaving her bleeding, and then began choking her. The situation escalated quickly. Blood was everywhere, including on his shirt. In an effort to silence her, Duran placed his shirt over her face and mouth. He only stopped when she ceased showing signs of life. Duran later described the murder as impulsive, blaming alcohol and Stephanie's actions for his loss of control. He claimed he had acted out of fear that she would report him to the police, but investigators suspected a simpler motive: robbery. Money and valuables were missing from the crime scene, and it was believed Duran intended to steal from Stephanie before the situation turned violent. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence in Peru, Duran attempted to negotiate with the authorities. He offered to reveal the location of Natalie Holloway's remains in exchange for being cleared of all charges in Stephanie's case, but the prosecutors refused to entertain his offer. The trial moved forward swiftly. The evidence against him was damning. Surveillance footage showed Duran entering and leaving the hotel room with Stephanie. Her blood was found on his body and clothing, and his DNA matched traces found on the victim and the crime weapon. Realizing he had no defense, Duran pleaded guilty on the advice of his attorney, who assured him this would result in a reduced sentence of 15 years. Duran's manipulative tendencies persisted throughout his incarceration. Despite never being charged in connection with Natalie Holloway's disappearance, he continued to be a figure of suspicion and intrigue. Waiting sentence in Peru, Duran's life took unexpected turns. He began a relationship with Lady Figueroa, a 33-year-old accountant who visited the prison to sell candy and cigarettes. Their romance led to marriage, which initially seemed to provide Duran with stability. However, this stability was short-lived. By 2020, Duran had left Lady for a younger woman, Eva, with whom he became involved in smuggling illegal substances into the prison. When authorities uncovered the operation, Duran was sentenced to additional prison time for drug trafficking. Initially, Peruvian authorities had planned to extradite Duran to the United States only after he completed his sentence for Stephanie Flores' murder. However, in May 2023, the Peruvian government reversed this decision, agreeing to temporarily transfer him to the US to face charges of extortion and wire fraud connected to Natalie's case. The decision was influenced by concerns that critical witnesses in the US, many of whom were elderly, might not survive the lengthy delay required for Duran's Peruvian sentence to conclude. The extradition was seen as a breakthrough for the Holloway family, who had spent nearly 2 decades seeking justice for Natalie. While Duran was not being tried for murder in the US, the charges against him represented a critical opportunity to hold him accountable for at least some of his actions. Peru's ambassador to the US expressed hope that the extradition would provide closure not only to the Holloway family, but also to Stephanie Flores' grieving loved ones. Duran opposed the extradition and, through his attorney, attempted to overturn it, arguing that he had not been properly notified. His motion was denied. In late May, Duran was severely beaten in a Peruvian prison. Despite his injuries, in early June, FBI agents arrived in Peru and used a plane to extradite him to the US. On June 8, 2023, Duran van der Sloot landed in the United States and was taken to a prison in Birmingham, Alabama, near Natalie Holloway's hometown. Duran was dissatisfied with the sentence and began to blame everything on his lawyer and the police, who allegedly forced him to confess. In the end, Duran was found guilty and sentenced to 28 years in prison.